Why, out of all the world's noodles, did pasta alone rise to the top? If kitchens around the world were to cast a vote to choose the world's most reliable backup food, the answer would not be bread or rice. It would be humble dry pasta. Today, it is found on the shelves of almost every supermarket across the globe. No seasoning packet, no built-in culinary ecosystem, and not even a fixed way to be eaten. Why was it this seemingly unremarkable strand of dried pasta that ultimately conquered the world's kitchens? Today, the world consumes over 14 million tons of pasta every year. An office worker in Beijing, a cab driver in New York, a college student in Tokyo, at the end of the day, they might all be doing the same thing. Open the cupboard, put on a pot of water, dropping the pasta, straining it when the time is up, and tossing it with whatever leftovers are sitting in the fridge. This scene repeats itself every day in every corner of the world, but few people notice that there's one crucial difference between it and most Asian noodles. The difference isn't about which one lasts longer in the packaging, but how well they hold their texture after cooking. Their countdown begins the moment they leave the pot, whether dried wheat noodles or fresh noodles. If soaked for just 5 minutes too long, the gluten elasticity collapses, turning into a soggy, mushy mess. But pasta is different. Its greatest strength isn't its flavor, it's built to wait. In the back of many Western restaurant kitchens, pasta can even be parboiled ahead of time until it's about 80% cooked, strained, tossed in oil, and cool down. It can wait in the kitchen for hours until it's thrown back into the pan and still maintain that perfect al dente bite. This ability to wait in the kitchen would later fundamentally alter its destiny. Dried noodles were not invented by Italians. Both China and Central Asia had developed portable sun-dried noodles, but only in the Mediterranean. It was in the Mediterranean that dry noodles underwent their most important commercial evolution, becoming closely tied to the hardest wheat and turning into a true commodity for long-distance trade. In southern Italy, the summers are long and dry. This isn't good news for most crops, but for one specific type of wheat, it was just right. It's called durum wheat, one of the hardest wheat varieties in the world. Rule if ordinary wheat is Play-Doh, durum is marble. It resists being milled into fine flour and can only be ground into coarse semolina. But this hardness brings an incredibly high protein content and gluten density. Pasta makers in southern Italy press the dough into long strands and hung them outside, letting them air dry for dozens of hours in the hot, dry Mediterranean sea breeze. As the moisture vanished inside, the protein matrix became incredibly dense. It didn't become tastier, but it became shelf-stable, mold-resistant, and resistant to breakage. The moment the first dried pasta appeared, it was built for travel. With that durable body, dried pasta set off. As East-West trade revitalized after the Crusades, port cities like Genoa and Venice rose rapidly. Beginning in the 13th century, Mediterranean trade entered a period of unprecedented prosperity. In the past, most food could only be consumed locally. Bread came from the neighboring village. Fresh noodles came from the corner shop. Producers and consumers lived in virtually the same place. But dry pasta was different. It was dried, bagged, and loaded onto merchant ships, appearing weeks later in cities thousands of kilometers away. It became one of the earliest staple foods capable of large-scale maritime transport. Yet, in the era of handmade pasta, this exportable dried pasta was incredibly labor-intensive. At the time, it wasn't some cheap blue-collar fuel, but a luxury item reserved for European nobility and wealthy merchants, far out of reach for ordinary people. It wasn't until centuries later that an urban catastrophe knocked it from the silver platters of aristocrats into the iron pots of the working class. Its rival was bread, which had ruled Europe for a millennium. For pasta to enter Northern Europe, it faced a world already dominated by bread. From London to Paris, bread was not just food, it was a system. Farmers grew the wheat, mills ground the flour, villages built the ovens. The entire rhythm of Europe revolved around leavened bread. To the people of that time, bread was the default answer to life. If pasta wanted to head north, it was like an outsider trying to redraw the map of an already built city. It couldn't even get its foot in the door, until an urban riot slammed the door open just a crack. In 17th century Naples, 300,000 urban poor, the Lazzaroni, were crammed together. They were once called the leaf eaters because they were so poor they could only survive on cheap cabbage and leaves. Pasta back then was simply too expensive. In the mid-17th century, the Spanish Empire was simultaneously embroiled in multiple European wars, and the prolonged conflicts constantly drained the treasury. To raise military funds, the Spanish dynasty ruling Naples continuously hiked taxes, even slapping heavy taxes on fruits, vegetables, and flour. Prices skyrocketed, and in 1647, the lower class finally erupted into open rebellion. A crisis of survival accelerated the adoption of a pasta-making technology that already existed. To reduce costs and increase output, more and more Neapolitan pasta makers adopted the wooden mechanical press, the torchio. Using massive leverage, it extruded the tough dough into uniform shapes in massive batches. What used to be backbreaking manual labor became an assembly line. Because mechanization drove down costs, the price of pasta instantly dropped below that of bread, flooding the streets. Dock workers needed nothing more than an iron pot and boiling water to whip up a meal in minutes. The people of Naples even earned a new nickname, macaroni eaters, mangia macaroni. But that wasn't the real turning point. Pasta didn't directly challenge the established bread system. Instead, it precisely wedged itself into the cracks where the bread system couldn't reach, into the gaps in urban life where people lacked the time, the space, or a traditional kitchen. From this moment on, it became a backup plan tailor-made for people with no time to cook. At the time, such people lived only in a handful of port cities. Later, these types of cities multiplied. As the world entered a fast-paced modern era, what were once mere urban crevices became the absolute mainstream of the world. With the mechanization of the Neapolitan pasta industry, this cheap, high-energy, shelf-stable food began spreading across the Mediterranean trade routes. Subsequently, with the rapid development of railways, steamships, and industrialized transport, more and more foods began to leave their places of origin. In this great global migration of food, the noodle world quickly experienced a massive divergence. For the vast majority of Asian noodles, they expanded by exporting an entire culinary ecosystem. Wherever Lanzhou beef noodles go, the broth has to come with it. The noodles must be pulled on the spot, and the soup must be simmered fresh. Japanese ramen doesn't just export a bowl of noodles, but an entire kitchen ecosystem. To go to a new place, you have to recreate the entire kitchen ecosystem. Otherwise, the bowl of noodles simply doesn't hold up. Some might ask, Doesn't China have dried wheat noodles too? They don't require carrying a whole kitchen around either. But that is precisely the catch. As modern logistics and the retail systems took shape, pasta happened to meet every requirement they demanded. The reason Chinese dried noodles couldn't go global is because its delicate physical properties left it as an isolated puzzle piece. Whereas the globalization of pasta was never a solo fight by a single strand of noodle. It was agriculture, manufacturing, retail, and the global logistics all working together. The catch with Chinese dry noodles isn't the transport, but their behavior after cooking. If left for too long, their gluten structure quickly fails. Pasta, however, thanks to durum wheat, is not only resistant to breakage when dry, but more importantly, incredibly resilient after leaving the pot. This natural industrial standardization allows it to be pre-cooked and finished to order, seamlessly fitting into the assembly lines of modern dining. It first transformed itself into a standardized product capable of fitting into any system. As for who delivered this standardized product to the entire world, that is the story of the next chapter. The one that truly caused this standardized product to explode globally was America. Following the unification of Italy, the economic chasm between the North and South widened. Industry was concentrated in the North, while the South suffered from chronic poverty, with agricultural crises, grapevine diseases, and economic recessions striking one after another. From the late 19th to the early 20th century, millions of southern Italian peasants were forced to board transatlantic immigrant steamships. In their luggage, the most reliable food they could carry was dried pasta. Initially, it was just the daily comfort food of immigrant communities. But America was entering an age of rapid industrialization. Railroads were extending. Cities were rapidly expanding. And more households began to rely on standardized food products. In 1916, Clarence Saunders invented the self-service grocery model in Tennessee with Piggly Wiggly, and the modern supermarket was born. The traditional model of clerks fetching items for customers shifted to self-selection by the consumers themselves. The brutal reality of supermarket shelf is this, that there is no longer a clerk to pitch products for you. Only those who can endure long stretches on the shelf and resist spoiling are the ones that survive. Thus, by the mid-20th century, food industry giants completely took over the pasta making business. They invested heavily into it, using highly efficient industrial rotary dryers to gradually and stably control the moisture content of dried pasta to below roughly 12.5%. Without a single preservative, it could sit peacefully on the shelf for years. On the shelves of a modern supermarket, one shelf holds dry pasta, another canned pasta sauce, and another refrigerated ground meat. These originally unrelated items were brought together into the exact same space. When post-World War II America exported this supermarket system, cold chain infrastructure, and globalized fast food logic to the world, this strand of dried noodle was shipped right along with it to every shelf on Earth. It no longer needed to explain itself, it just needed to be open. Once pasta integrated into the American supermarket system, pasta became fully standardized. Its length, thickness, and cooking time were all completely fixed. But an even more thorough localization was taking place. It stopped obsessing over exporting Italian culture and willingly allowed itself to be directly adapted by local cultures everywhere. In Tokyo, chefs in Western-style Yoshoku diners melt butter into the pan, adding spicy pollock roll and shredded nori to create mentaiko pasta. In Manila, home kitchens swap tomato paste for sweet banana ketchup, adding sugar and chopped hot dogs. to turn it directly into a sweet party pasta. In North America, factories melt cheddar cheese to coat macaroni, turning it into mac and cheese to conquer school lunches. In China, it can be tossed straight into a wok, stir-fried with beef, black pepper, and spicy mala sauce, even achieving a version infused with genuine wok egg. The same pasta enters different kitchens and becomes a completely different dish. It never insists on being eaten the Italian way. Returning to the modern kitchen, a more practical question arises. Why has it become our preferred go-to quick meal today? The answer lies not in flavor, but in the failure rate. A modern person's dinner decisions actually unfold in a state of sheer exhaustion. Work is over, the commute is done, and the brain has been processing information all day long. To face a system of uncertainties made up of chopping, heat control, and seasoning at this point is in itself a massive drain on energy. But pasta compresses the entire process into a predictable routine that is incredibly friendly to ordinary people. A pot of water, throw it in, and you don't even need to set a strict timer. You don't need to rely on experience, nor do you depend on spontaneous inspiration. Overcooking it by a minute or two, or walking away to answer a phone call after straining it makes no difference at all. As for what to pair it with, it is almost never picky. Tomatoes, ground meat, canned sauces, they're all just things you add at the end. What it offers to people today is not culinary skill, but a routine that's almost impossible to mess up. In an everyday environment full of uncontrollable variables, this kind of low-risk process itself became exactly what modern life demanded. The water begins to boil. Bubbles rise steadily from the bottom of the pot. A handful of dry noodles is dropped into the pot, softening slowly in the boiling water. This scene plays out repeatedly across different cities, in rented apartments, in shared kitchens, in the dead of night after working overtime. It doesn't require you to understand its history, nor does it require you to possess superb culinary skills. Strain, drain, sauce, mix, and a meal is done. The water in the pot gradually stops boiling. The steam dissipates. The kitchen falls quiet once more. So, will you be making pasta tonight?